Ready?
Sure, what can go wrong?
Lots. Good evening. I'm Noah Kipley-Ogman, Chair of the Kingston Rent Guidelines Board. It is 6:31 p.m. and we are here in the Kingston City Hall building. I'm calling this meeting of the Kingston Rent Guidelines Board to order, and I would like to have my colleagues introduce themselves, starting with Carol. If you could say your name and into your mic, say your name and whether you're a tenant representative, a property owner representative, or a member of the public.
Hi, my name is Carol Soto. I am a tenant representative. I live at 305 Hurley Avenue, Stony Run, the infamous Stony Run.
We're tenants, we share. My name is Michael Tierney. I am the other tenant representative. I live at 25 John Street. My name is Michael Tierney. I'm the tenant representative and I live at 25 John Street.
Name is Michael Brown, member of the public. Noah Kipley-Ogman, Chair and member of the public.
Diana Lopez, and member of the public.
Mia Inoue, member of the public.
Arlene Fuentes, member of the public.
Tara Perry, property owner.
Anthony Tampone, property owner.
The first thing I would like to do today is we have received a number of written public testimonies that we have received by email, and we have, I believe, at least 2 additional pieces of public testimony that I would like this board to decide whether or not we read aloud into the record, or what I would propose. I will make a motion that we do not read into the record the 90 pages of testimony that we were emailed earlier this week, but that we do read into the record the other pieces of public testimony that have come to this board that we have at this table. So I think that
Having trouble understanding you.
I think we should read into the record the 2 pieces of public testimony that we've received outside of what was emailed in a batch from DHCR. So
That's your motion?
that's my motion.
All right, I second.
And let's go around. Carol.
Aye.
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 The motion carries. And Arlene, would you read the piece of testimony that you've wisely printed out?
Is there more than this, or is this it?
I think Michael also has one.
You have one, Michael? All right, so do you want, you'll read yours and I'll read mine? This was received on November 9th to the board individually. Dear Chair Kipley-Ogman and board members, this is Charles Sanchez writing. For those of you who do not know me, I was originally nominated for the Red Guidelines Board, but withdrew my nomination upon DHCR advising I would have to cease all tenant advocacy activities and that I would be barred from pressing DHCR to timely review decision complaint rental appeals. Unfortunately, I fell for DHCR's scare tactics that I would have to cease all tenant advocacy activities, since board members are in fact able to advocate. For example, Diana works for a tenant advocacy organization, but I digress. Protecting tenants from unaffordable rent increases in a tight housing market at a time of high inflation is a large part of why Kingston adopted rent stabilization and established the Rent Guidelines Board in the first place. Now, as you approach the critical task of establishing a rent adjustment and look-back period, all eyes are on your ability to strike balance between the needs of tenants, landlords, lords of the land, and the public interest. This is especially challenging during times of high inflation. However, your methodology in deciding on rent adjustments look-back period is made easier by analyzing the impact that real estate ownership and capitalization have on prices and affordability here in Kingston, New York. Landlords, large and small, are traditionally much better capitalized and have the ability to weather the cost increase storm that is inflation. Landlords not only earn net profits from owning property, but often are more financially sophisticated and have invested money, technical currency, across different verticals to further earn profits, all of which increase during market booms. The National Association of Realtors stated that Kingston's housing market was the hottest in the nation during 2021. And then he gives a website, which impacted sales and rentals, giving Kingston landlords a unique position of earning potential. Did tenants receive this same earning potential as landlords in what turned out to be the hottest real estate market in the country? And did the real estate market in Kingston boom organically, or was it driven by a 1-in-100-year event known as the pandemic COVID? And how do you adjust for an artificially driven boom? Not all landlords in Kingston whose buildings are covered by ETPA harass their tenants, use lease renewal intimidation tactics, and willfully violate the 2020 Fire Code of New York State and the 2020 Property Maintenance Code of New York State. Given this, it is most probable that tenants of landlords who efficiently and humanely manage and maintain their properties will not even file for a rent appeal complaint with DHCR. These tenants are receiving what they are paying for and in good conscience will not want to negatively affect their good landlord. Therefore, any rent adjustment and look back period which you decide is not going to have a blanket effect on landlords' properties or the Kingston rental market, will not negatively affect the public interest. The rent adjustment and look back will simply be one tool in the toolbox for negatively affected tenants, which seem to be concentrated in ETPA buildings owned by enterprise landlords. With all hard data you have received from tenants, it is evident that rents rose dramatically, and it can be concluded that this was not an organic market change. To compensate for this, I urge you to most seriously consider a negative rent adjustment in the range of -15% to -18%. Again, not every tenant will file a rent appeal, so landlords who are efficiently and humanely managing and maintaining their properties will likely not be negatively affected. In terms of the look back period and reviewing documents disseminated by your chair and the attached, which does not account for 2021 and 2022 per Zumper, there was a 20% increase from 2021 this year. It seems 2017 or 2018 is a point in time to artificial increases. That said, I strongly urge a look back period of 4 to 5 years. Being a named party in a lawsuit is never comforting, and unfortunately, in the United States, anyone can sue anyone for anything, even matters without merit and which are willfully frivolous are filed. Rent guidelines boards have been sued by landlords in the past, and in all of them, the AG office represents the boards. And he gives two examples, sued in 2016 and sued in 2019, and he gives websites, and this will be in the public record. Rent guidelines boards being sued seems to be par for the course, unfortunately, but never before has a board postponed their vote. I urge you to stay the course and render your decision. Rent adjustment look back period on schedule. Thank you for your dedicated service and most serious consideration of a negative rent adjustment in the range of -15 to -18 and a 4 to 5 year look back. Many thanks, Charles O. Sanchez. And he gives his phone number and email.
Thank you, Arlene. Michael.
Yes, so we received a public comment just a little while ago, so I wanted to make sure that it was read because yes, we got a public comment a little while ago that was sent to me just to make sure that it gets received and read tonight. This is from State Senator Michelle Hinchy, who represents the 46th Senate District, including the city of Kingston. Sorry, I have to zoom in. As the Kingston Rent Guidelines Board gathers to vote for the first time for rent regulations for buildings with over 6 or more units built prior to 1974 in the city of Kingston, I would like to urge the board to keep the needs of tenants in the forefront of their mind. Tenants in Kingston have weathered unprecedented rent increases over the past few years, with the average rent in Kingston rising by over 11% last year alone. Unfortunately, wages have often not kept up with these increases, and additional costs of living expenses are skyrocketing, putting additional burdens on renters in our community. With over 18% of Kingston's population living in poverty, our residents are at risk of being displaced when faced with unforeseen and often significantly large rent increases. We need our housing costs to be in line with local wages while taking into account the additional costs of living for our local residents. Managing these housing costs will allow residents to continue to stay in Kingston, raise their families, and age in place. I am grateful that we have this new board in place to set guidelines that will serve the needs of our community, and I ask the members of the board to think critically about what is best for local residents and tenants at this time. That is from sincerely, Michelle Hinchy, New York State Senator, District 46.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Senator Hinchy also. I would like to take a moment to ask our colleagues at DHCR on the advice of Arlene, if Peter, could you give us an outline and a reminder of our responsibilities? Yeah.
Can everybody hear me? Okay, good evening, everyone. You can't hear me? Oh, you know what? I'll take this empty seat. Okay, good evening, everyone. Chair, if you just want to restate exactly what you're looking for from me.
Can you outline for us our legal responsibilities?
Okay, I think what you mean is your responsibilities for what this board needs to produce. Is that correct? Well, first I'll mention that, Arlene, I know that you weren't present at the first meeting. On the public notice that's been sent out a couple of times to the mailing list and disseminated, several places, there is a public meeting scheduled for tonight. The express purpose of talking about the record that's been received, and if possible, to set the guidelines for this evening. The board on 21st of September also set a placeholder meeting in case this board is not able to or doesn't decide to try to set a guideline for this evening, which has already been publicly noticed with the exact same agenda. It's a continuing consideration and discussion of the record before the board, and setting the adjustments that need to be set by this board. So that would be, if necessary, scheduled for Monday, November 14th. So I'm not sure if you're aware of that. I think everyone else on the board is aware of that. But just so everyone's aware, that's been publicly noticed. If necessary, this board has a placeholder meeting set up for this coming Monday, November 14th. So just briefly to reiterate what this board's responsibility for producing is going to be. There's two distinct requirements that this board needs to meet. They need to set a rental adjustment for leases going forward and a fair market rental adjustment guideline for leases going backwards. So I'll explain both of them in brief. I don't want to take too long. However, the adjustment for leases going forward, after Kingston adopted the Emergency Tenant Protection Act and brought rent regulation to the city, the effective date of that was August 1st, 2022. So this board's main function going forward is going to be to set the maximum rate of increase that a landlord can charge on a new and renewal lease. So rent regulated tenants are entitled to vacancy leases, and they're also entitled to renewal leases under the law. So this board's primary responsibility going forward will be to set what the maximum rate of adjustment will be when those leases come due. So, that could be it's going to be either a 1 year or a 2 year lease when it's offered. There's no month-to-month tenancy. There's no 6-month tenancy. It's a 1 or a 2 year lease. So what this board's responsibility is for leases from August 1st, 2022, when ETPA became effective in Kingston going forward, and it'll be effective until October 1st of 2023, this adjustment that we're talking. Are you following?
Say that again, August 1st to,
So yeah, this adjustment will be effective for any lease, new and renewal lease going from August 1st of 2022 until the end of September 2023. And this board will meet in the summer of 2023 to set the adjustments that will become effective October 1st of 2023. So what that should look like, this adjustment from August 1st through September 30th of 2023 will be an adjustment for 1 year leases and for 2 year leases. And they can be the same, but often they vary in the other counties. So does that cover the question that you asked for that one? Okay. And then I think you sent an email to the board's box earlier today seeking clarification on this special fair market rent guideline. So this is not something that's going to be an ongoing responsibility for the board. This is something that is triggered by the adoption of ETPA. So this board's responsibility is also, if you choose to set a fair market rent guideline, which is going to be used by DHCR in determining fair market rent appeals that are filed by tenants in the city of Kingston. And the fair market rent appeal essentially says, prior to the adoption of rent regulation in Kingston, my landlord impermissibly increased my rent at a rate that was too high. So this board's responsibility for the fair market rent appeal purposes is to set a separate guideline, which has two components to it. The first component is setting a look back period. So that's going to be the time frame in which DHCR will look back and say, okay, during this time period, was there an impermissible rent increase? So that's something that's to be decided by this board, what the look back period is. It's an important consideration that shouldn't be taken lightly as to how long that look back period should be. Because that will ultimately inform how many tenants are able to file these fair market rent appeals. The second component is a maximum or allowable increase during that look back period needs to be set. So that should also look like a percentage. At the first meeting, I gave an example of really the only recent example of a new municipality to come in and what their look back guideline looked like. And that was in the village of Ossining in Westchester County. A couple of years ago, they came in and they set a look back period of 6 months. And there was a 2% increase for tenants with no leases, a 4% increase for tenants with leases. As I stressed at the first meeting, this fair market rent guideline, as well as the adjustment for leases from August 1st going forward, should be based on, there really is no limit really set forth in the law, but it really needs to be based on what this board heard in the public testimony, in the data that's been circulated. Needs to be something that's reasonable and something that's defensible. So I know that that's a lot for, a short period of time, but, I wanted to give you the benefit of, because I know you missed the first meeting. That's really what this board's responsibility is, whether it's set tonight, whether it's set on Monday, in the placeholder meeting that's been set up, or, at another time that the board decides. But hopefully that covers the question you asked.
Is it also possible for the board to decide not to set a fair market rent adjustment? Is that also an option?
Well, it's up to the board to set the parameters for what DHCR is going to decide fair market rent appeals on. So, certainly the board, if they want to, can set a fair market rent appeal that wouldn't have a look back period, wouldn't have any adjustments. I mean,
And what would that look like?
well, this board would make a finding that a fair market rent appeal is not something that is appropriate for the board to make. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Would you say that again?
So the board in that case, if this board decides that no fair market rent appeal look back is appropriate, then conceivably they could set a fair market rent guideline that says that there's no look back period. There's not a lot of recent examples for the fair market rent appeals. Other than the Ossining example that I gave you. So, I guess it's theoretically possible that the board declines to set a look back period on that.
So we could, a fair market rent guideline for separate bedroom sizes? Is that what we're talking about? 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom, 5 bedrooms?
April, I don't know if you want to jump in on, but again, there's not a lot of examples with this. And with Ossining, what they did was a percentage for tenants with no leases and a percentage for tenants with leases.
I'm thought that it was, for example, we would say that, just to give round numbers, a 1 bedroom in 2019 should have been $600. Is that what we're talking?
No. That's not really how this process works. I mean, the guidelines should be applicable to apartments kind of regardless of size. I mean, there is some ability for boards to have some variations in their guidelines that they set. Frequently the Westchester County guideline sets a separate guideline for tenants who pay for their own utilities. But
When you're talking about guidelines, you're not talking about a number. You're not talking say $500. You're talking.
I'm talking about a percentage of increase on a lease.
So a percentage, say from 2019 to 2020 should have been 3%, we would say.
Yes. So if you were to read the Ossining, just to go back to the Ossining one, they would say for the fair market rent appeals, there was a 6-month look back period. So if somebody was complaining about something that was 7 months before the effective date, DHCR wouldn't have jurisdiction to hear that. And if you look at the percentages that they set, those are the maximum allowable percentages. So if you were to receive there was a 2% for tenants with no leases. If a tenant during the 6-month period received a 3% increase, that would be deemed an impermissible increase, and DHCR would adjust it accordingly. And in that case, DHCR would look at that, they would adjust the rent down, and the landlord would be required to, remit the increase back to the tenant.
If there is a multiple year look back period, are we to set a percentage for each year or 1% for each year?
I mean, again, we're talking about something that doesn't occur very frequently, and there's nothing that I can think of that would disallow you, to set something for different periods. But I would also urge that whatever you set should be based on all of the data that was received, the record, which part of the agenda tonight is to talk about what the record is. So, again, these guidelines need to be defensible, they need to be reasonable. And if you're going to be setting something with a bunch of differences like that, I would want to be able to point something in the record that shows this is why we did this, this is why we did that. There's also an operational concern for DHCR. If you're setting, different rates for different years, that just seems somewhat unruly to deal with. But, again, there's not a lot of limits on what you're going to be setting. So, it could be that that's to be decided whether that's appropriate for you to do.
Could you elaborate a little bit more on the mechanics of how it works when somebody would file a fair market rent appeal given the guidelines? Let's take the Austin example of 6 months and let's say 4%. My understanding is that someone files a fair market rent appeal, they give supporting testimony of what their rents were, and then DHCR looks at what comparable units would have been, and that's what the fact sheet says is used for DHCR to set to file that appeal, right? So is the rent of the unit adjusted first and then the percentage applied, or how does that work? Let's give an example. Somebody files a fair market rent appeal. They have a $1,200 a month rent now. They think that it should have been when we're talking about a look back period of a year ago, and we say that there's a 5% increase, right? Given that example, how would that work, and what would they end up with as the rent that they are paying now?
So the fact sheet is actually addressing what happens in New York City with rent controlled. I've never had anybody ask me to do that. The fact sheet itself addresses rent control in New York City. So the example of what the rent could be or should be is outside of what you're looking at. That's really when an apartment is converted from a rent control tenant vacates an apartment, the owner is going to access and rent the apartment out as rent stabilized. In this case, what you're looking at is a look back period and a percentage. So yours was a 1,200. Just give me your numbers again. I'm sorry.
Let's say someone currently is paying $1,200 per month for a 1-bedroom apartment, right? And we have a year look back period, right? So they are looking for a fair market rent appeal based on a year ago. Is there are you addressing the individual unit, comparable units, comparable amenities in order to do, by the word fair market rent appeal would make you think that you're trying to adjust that to be what would have been fair market at that time. Is that what's happening, or are you just using the number percentage number that we pick?
It's the number that you pick. So in your example, okay, so two things. In Kingston, as of August 1st, owners are not supposed to collect any additional rent, right? Okay. So in your example, if the person had a $1,200 rent August 2nd and it was increased to a different, pick any number, it would be rolled back at least to the 1,200. If you had a 5% guideline and you said 1 year, if a year ago their rent was $1,100 and the owner raised their rent to $1,200, what DHCR would do is collect the data from the tenant. It's not related to amenities. It's not related to a comparable apartment because that's really a rent control situation in the city. What they would do is take the tenant's current rent of $1,200. They would look back a year and the rent was $1,100. So the owner on a renewal before August 1st, based on your numbers, would be entitled to a 5% guideline increase total, $55. If he charged $1,200 and the tenant filed an overcharge complaint, the owner would be directed to pay the tenant back $45 because that's the difference between what he could have collected and what this board has set as a fair market rent appeal, and refund that amount to the tenant over whatever number of months the tenant paid the difference.
So the fair, oh,
That's a motion. Do we have a second? Deanna seconds. Carol? Aye.
Aye.
nay.
The motion carries. We have 5 more minutes for these questions.
I'll try to make it quick. There is no consideration. So let's just say somebody, if we have someone has been paying significantly more than comparable units for the last 5 years, and we set a 1-year look back period, a fair market rent adjustment appeal will not affect anything for them. It will, let's say it's 5%. It would just make a maximum change of 5% looking back a year.
Correct.
Okay, so there's no ability to kind of like let the fair market rent appeals settle in to like adjust. All right, I guess I get it. I was unclear on how that worked based on how it was previously described. So,
Other questions? Thank you so much, Peter and April. Thank you so much for making sure that we get clarity on this. At this point in time, I would like to welcome our landlord representatives and our tenant representatives to offer presentations of what they think are reasonable choices for this board to make. I will leave it to the 4 of you to decide who goes first. Thank you, Tara.
I did prepare a little something to read. I'd like to thank everyone who came out to testify in front of the Rent Guidelines Board. I just like to take a moment to give you a little background on myself so you can see that I have extensive experience and am qualified to speak on this topic. I've been a real estate agent for 20 years and have professionally managed residential and commercial complexes in Ulster and Dutchess County for over 25 years. In addition to handling tenant questions and concerns on a daily basis, part of my job is creating and managing annual budgets for the properties I manage. My career allows me to work with investors buying and selling residential properties, as well as residents who live in apartments. So I am sympathetic to both sides of the issues landlords and tenants face on a daily basis. In these last 2 public meetings, we've heard a lot from the Stony Run tenants. This group seems to be impacted the most. Most of the testimony we heard were complaints about the management, the maintenance, and the upkeep of the property. There were a few tenants who were able to provide actual rental increase amounts and percentages. The increases seem to be anywhere from 5 to 15% per year, according to the testimony that we heard. Running a property is a lot like running your household. Just like you make a budget for your monthly bills to make sure you can pay everything with the income you have, the landlord does the same thing in order to make sure that they can run their property with the rent they collect. What a lot of people don't realize is that a property has a lot of expenses, and these expenses are constantly going up. They don't ever go down. There are mortgage payments, taxes, insurance, utilities, maintenance, office staff salaries, maintenance salaries, landscape, snow removal costs, maintenance repair costs, outside vendors like a plumber or an electrician. The money to pay for these things comes from the rents the landlord collects. Unfortunately, during COVID, some residents stopped paying rent. I experienced this firsthand at a property I manage. Some residents did pay rent for a few years. During that period, landlords could not evict tenants, so that was less money the landlord had coming in each month, and a tenant continued to live at the property using utilities and not paying for anything. This hurt a lot of landlords and continues to do so. New York State has emergency rental assistance program that the residents can apply to, also known as ERAP. This will pay landlords up to 12 months of back rent and up to 3 months of future rent. Unfortunately, the average ERAP application has taken 6 months to a year to process for a landlord to possibly even see a payment from this. It's a long time. Some landlords had to take additional loans out just to be able to pay for the basics and to pay the mortgage. According to the ERAP website, just in Ulster County, landlords were awarded over $9 million of back unpaid rent. According to the ERAP website, the average payment was over $10,000. This should give you an idea on how many people have not paid rent in the last few years, and this is just Ulster County. Not paying the rent affects how much money is coming into the property to pay for monthly bills. Landlords find it necessary each year to raise rents to keep up with inflation and the rising costs to run their property. Most are not lining their pockets with money like most people think. When there's not enough money coming in due to people not paying rent or increasing costs or vacancies, et cetera, it makes it hard for a landlord to maintain the property. While I do believe that certain landlords have taken advantage of the situation and have excessively raised rents, not all landlords did that. The other landlords should not be punished for the actions of a few. I do feel a rent reduction in any amount or even a freeze on rents is not going to help tenants or landlords in the situation we're currently in. If the landlord does not have enough money coming in to properly maintain the buildings, the residents are the ones who ultimately suffer. Maintenance may have to take parts from empty apartments to fix the current ones like they did in Stony Run. They may have to cut down on services such as swimming pool, trash butler, laundry, fitness rooms. They may not be able to repair leaking roofs or broken pieces of glass. They will not be able to buy new appliances when old ones break down. They may have to replace them with used appliances. They may not even be able to pay the electric or heating bills, which will affect tenants. Just to give you an example, I run a property that brings in about $1.5 million of rent a year. All the utilities are included. It sounds like a lot of money, but by the time the expenses to run the property are paid, there are no owner salaries being paid here either. We have no money left by the end of the year. The electric bill alone is close to $300,000 a year. Insurance for the property is over $100,000 a year. Trash is $30,000 a year. Water sewer is $72,000 a year. Mowing lawns and landscaping is $40,000 a year. And those are just a few expenses, which no mean represent all the expenses the property incurs. And those expenses that I just mentioned are around $550,000 a year. That's before the mortgage, taxes, and other expenses are even paid. I'm a numbers person, so I'm going to give you some numbers to put things into perspective. HUD has released its area median income for 2022 on their website. And believe it or not, Kingston has a median household income of $96,000 per year. Now that's household income. It's household income, not individual income. RUPCO, which is also known as Section 8, uses this information in part to determine what the affordability is for their rents that they will approve for low-income households receiving housing vouchers in Ulster County. This information can be found directly on the RUPCO website. Studios, 1125, 1 bedrooms, 1272, 2 bedrooms, 1636, 3 bedrooms, 2152, and so on. I'm going to use Stony Run as an example. Now remember, Stony Run's a market rate property. It's not low income housing. Stony Run's current rents, according to apartments.com, where they advertise, are anywhere from $1,730 a month to $2,284 a month. And this is directly from apartments.com. It's an average rent of about $2,000 per apartment. If you voted for a 30% reduction in rent on that $2,000, that would be $600 increase in rent per month per apartment. There are I believe there's 267 apartments in Stony Run. So 600 times 267 apartments is $160,200 a month. The property now doesn't have an income to operate. Over the course of just 1 year, that's $2 million. Now, if you do a long look back period of 3 years, like many have suggested during their testimony, that would be $2 million per year times 3 years, which is an additional $6 million. You will literally bankrupt the property. The owners most likely would abandon the property, the residents still living in it, Services would stop, and once the conditions are bad enough, the building department would have to step in and probably condemn the property due to the unsafe conditions from nothing being maintained. Then you have 267 families without housing just from Stony Run. This doesn't include the other 63 properties, totaling roughly 930 units that could have potentially the same outcome and become homeless. A rent reduction and a long look back period sound great. Who doesn't want to pay less rent? We all do. But in reality, when you look at the numbers, it's unrealistic. You will not have properties left for renters if you vote for this. What you will have are landlords that are going to turn into slumlords that cannot afford to maintain their properties properly due to the lack of income coming in. This is going to bankrupt owners and cause buildings to close down and fall into a state of disrepair. Then no one has a safe, clean place to live. What I would propose would be a modest 5% increase for the first year and a 1-year look back period. That comes out to a $100 increase on a $2,000 a month apartment or $75 increase on a $1,500 a month apartment, just to give you an example. Even Social Security this year is giving recipients an 8.7% cost of living increase for 2023. Last year, their cost of living increase was 5.9%. For those tenants in Stony Run, for example, that say that their rent went up more than 5%, they would have the right to file that appeal and potentially have the rent lowered. For example, if you were paying $2,000 a month in rent and the landlord raised you 15%, which would be $300, and they should have only raised you 5%, which would have been $100, you would potentially be entitled to $200 back for each of the months that they overcharged you. If a 12-month look-back period is adopted, this would mean you could potentially get back up to $2,400. The solution benefits most of the tenants and the owners, both the tenants and the owners. The tenants will know what to expect when it comes to renewal time, and if they were unfairly increased, can go back for up to a year to recoup the overpayments. The benefits to the landlord are that they will be able to pay for the necessities to keep the property running and be able to afford the increase in cost to keep the property running properly in the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tara. Any questions for Tara?
So everybody's going to go and then ask the questions. And do you guys have different proposals? The two property owners, you have different proposals?
No, if you both want to speak, and I'll say a little piece, and that, yeah.
I didn't hear you.
I'm not sure what you're asking.
Is your proposal the same as Tara's?
Oh, no, as far as like a guideline or anything?
Yeah.
No, I've made
Okay.
no determination on that.
Would you like to offer a presentation of your view?
Yeah, I'd certainly take a minute to speak.
Thank you, Junior.
You know, there is no question that our community is in the depths of a housing crisis. Our city, our state, and our federal government have systematically refused to invest in good housing policy for decades and decades now. And it was inevitable that we would be in the situation that we are right now. Everyone saw that coming, or everyone should have seen that coming at the very least. We are in a challenging situation, especially because as much as the heartfelt testimony that we've gotten over the last few days and the things that have been written in, we really do not have a significant amount of data in order to make a decision on. And I'm very concerned about that. We've heard from just over 2% of the units that are covered by the ETPA in the city of Kingston. The vast majority of those that testimony has been from a single property here in the city of Kingston, from Stony Run. And I thank all those people for testifying, because it's it is very clear how stressful bad management practices from a property owner can affect someone's life, and I think one of the things, this what we are creating here is rent stabilization, right? And I think that it makes everyone, if you know what's coming down the pike, it's a lot easier to plan, right? We want to make sure that everybody knows what's happening going forward, so that they can plan their lives accordingly, right? And no one wants a quick change in what's happening in housing. And it doesn't really matter where you sit in the scheme of housing opportunity. That's a bad thing to happen to anyone. I went through everyone that gave us testimony, and I have some really mixed feelings about what we've seen, which is why I kind of really would love to be able to see more data. According to the testimony that we've gotten in recent months or so, especially at Stony Run, there's been a significant increase in rents, but most of the testimony that we heard, people declared that they had rents that are below HUD's standard of affordability, according to 30% of 80% AMI numbers for the Kingston economic area. Why that is, it's hard to say. The few people that have been and gave us testimony that showed that they had been in a unit for quite some time, more than a decade, if you look at a standard rate of increase compounding for the entire time that they were in there, no one that I saw exceeded a 3% per year compounding rate of increase. I feel like that's pretty reasonable. Clearly there's 4 actors, and I'm sure everyone we definitely have an affordability problem, but it's hard to make a choice based on the data that we have available to us right now that would not be easily considered arbitrary. We have almost no cost data from property owners. And I don't know how it's going to affect property owners. I've seen the after effects of the 2008 financial crisis. Almost all of the properties that we own were bought as part of that, where someone that was a property owner fell into financial distress, was unable to maintain the property, ended up a bunch of them, people just left because there were not operating utilities and the property was in a significant state of disrepair. Sometimes people were still living there and it was in a significant state of disrepair. I wouldn't want to be in a position to make that happen again. And I don't think that with the data that we have right now, we can say that we won't cause that. I mean, I hope that we don't. I certainly want to do something that's very reasonable. But I cannot make a choice in a vacuum. I feel like we really need more data to be able to make a guideline that would not be easily challenged and would be that I could have any amount of confidence in. That's my piece.
Thank you, Junior. Any questions for Junior or for Tara?
I have a question. So to clarify, Junior, you think that we should not make a decision?
I think that if we have an opportunity to gather more data, especially if well, I mean, we need to ask our friends at DHCR to answer some questions we asked them last time, but if we have an opportunity to be able to preserve tenants' right to a fair market rent appeal, which was on the table, I don't know where that ended up. And we have an opportunity to gather some more data without hurting anyone. Currently, no one's rent is allowed to go up. And if we can preserve their right for a fair market rent appeal and spend another, hopefully not more than a couple of weeks or a month to collect data, then I think that would give us the ability to make a well-informed decision. And maybe that decision says that we need a really long look back and a big decrease, and maybe it doesn't support that. I can't make any ruling on that because I don't think we have any significant amount of data that would support such a decision.
So are you planning on abstaining from any vote, or do you plan on abstaining from a vote we take tonight? I mean, we have data. We've got testimony from the public. That's data. We've got the American Community Surveys. That's data. We have data from experts in planning and sociology and economics. That's data. Name any kind of public hearing that gets more than 2% of the people affected. I would show you a unicorn. That just doesn't happen. We have the data. We have to make a decision. We're obligated to make a decision. Carol got her RR1 form. What about those tenants at 58 Fair Street? They don't have time to wait. These pieces are going to keep moving.
I'm going to ask you to try to be less combative in asking questions, Michael. So you don't have to answer that question. Thank you. Any other
You're welcome
questions?
to.
Oh, sure, I'll ask another question. So, in addition to the testimony that we heard from tenants, which, I didn't interpret it the way that both of you did in terms of the percentages of increases that we heard people experienced. Since 2019, I heard a lot of people who experienced, 20% or more increases. And I also, I guess, my question is, do you not consider the information, the data that we have from Zillow, from the Community Service Society, from Ulster County's Planning Board, from the Planning Department, from the Rental Housing Survey, to be data, or to be, what we have, for example, Zillow data that shows us 100% increase in rents between September 2015 and September 2022, and a 30% increase from September 2020 to September 2022. The Community Service Society shows a 27% increase between 2016 and 2020 for 1 bedrooms, and a 50% increase for 2 bedrooms. The Rental Housing Survey by Ulster County's Planning Board shows that the cost of a 2-bedroom apartment in Ulster County grew by 48% between 2016 and 2020, right? So this all seems to me to be relevant data that we have, and I'm wondering how it has factored into your conclusions tonight.
I'll answer that in 2 pieces. Most significantly because that data unfortunately is non-specific to the purview of this board, right? We are specifically looking at 63 properties, and it's when we're looking at something as broad as the market data that is, I will say that I 100% discount and ignore all Zillow data. I've spot checked it on every one of my properties, and it's incorrect on every single one of them. And Zillow data is just not, it is not credible at all. They are very clearly a marketing company, and they're clearly a marketing company that profits off of rising markets. So they want to make it look like prices go up. So that aside, the data collected by Ulster County and Pattern for Progress and whatnot is definitely valuable, but it's non-specific to the information that we actually need, right? So we know that that rents are changing in the Kingston economic area countywide, but we don't know whether or not rents changed in most of the properties that are on that our guideline would affect, right? So let's just take the example of what happens on a small locally owned 6-unit building that maybe somebody hasn't raised the rent significantly in quite a number of years, and then require them to lower the rent over, significantly as well. Does that push that owner into insolvency? How does that support our housing market if we're doing that? All right. I think that if we had more data, we could make a choice that we would know whether or not that was something we were choosing to do or not, right? But we don't have that information. That's what I'm going by. The broad information is great for broad policy decisions. Unfortunately, we are dealing with a relatively small subsection of the housing market that all of those studies are based on, and it's just not specific enough to be, I think, significantly credible.
Thank you, Junior. Yeah, Deanna.
So you mentioned that you talked or know of small homeowners that it was difficult for them to keep their building or their apartments, right? Were they able to submit testimony like the tenants? And
I'm talking about my experience in the rental market in the city of Kingston as a whole, not specifically to, I am quite disappointed actually that we haven't gotten more testimony or almost any testimony from from property owners, and I'm not quite sure why that is. Housing is a complex ecosystem, and it needs all the players to be able to thrive. And that includes certainly tenants, but it also includes housing providers. And we need to take into account all of those perspectives. And, I'm sure come next year when we have, rental registration data, and we will be able to make a really sound decision. But I fear making a very arbitrary choice at this point in time.
so with the data that you're trying, that more data that you're asking for, what makes you think that they will fill that information, like that survey or so?
I don't know, but we certainly can try. And if we don't hurt anything, if we can preserve the rights, which again, well, maybe we need to ask our DHR whether or not we have an answer on this, but if we can preserve the rights of people to make a fair market rent appeal, we can know that they are not going, their 90-day time is not going to run out, or they will be able to apply for a fair market rent appeal, whether or not we make a guideline. What's the harm in taking some time to collect more data? We will start to have the rental registration information, whatever they can get for us. We'll be able to do our own surveying. Hopefully, some property owners will submit some data. If they don't, then and we give it some time to be able to do that, then that's what we've got. But I mean, especially when we're talking about a look back period, if we only have information about like changes in rents from one property. I mean, we've heard testimony from a few other people, but they weren't specific to changes in rents, right? So if we don't have that information, if we survey tenants, you know, with the survey that I circulated or any other data collection method, I don't really care how it works, right? But if we can get that information, then we can say, here's a period of time where rents in a statistically significant portion of these properties changed significantly, right? And then we can say, all right, if that happened in 2019, well, maybe that's where we really need to focus on. If that happened in 2022, that's where we really need to focus on. We don't really know that right now. And a lot of the testimony we got was like very non-specific. We got very few dates from everybody, you know, from almost anyone. We have a handful of people that said, yeah, my rent changed significantly. I got these predatory letters from the management at Stony Run. That happened. There's no choice. There's no doubt that that happened. But did that happen everywhere, right? And what do we do? If I could make a ruling on what was going to happen at Stony Run, I'd be happy to do that right now. But above and beyond that, we feel very challenged to do so.
I asked because, you know, like there was time for small homeowners given the opportunity to submit testimony, the same as tenants, and they took, you know, hours from their job to come and be at these public hearings. We heard over 60 more, and you know, they took that opportunity. And same as you, I'm like concerned that small homeowners did not, you know, make the time to come here. We did hear from like 3 or 4 the first public hearing and then 2 on the second. So that's why I was asking, like, what difference would it make from this survey to like what was submitted?
I also want to see stuff from other units. You know, there was a great organizing at Stony Run. Glad that all those people came out, but you know, we have a very, I mean, I tallied them all, but it's not very many from other units.
Just one more question and then we'll move on.
I mean, just a point of. Yeah, just a point of information. I have in my notes from the hearings and in our PDFs, you know, testimony from 58 Fair, residents of 58 Fair, residents of Dutch Village. You know, Michelle Hirsch testified about 20% increases just this summer at Chestnut Mansions. So and Stony Run is a pretty significant proportion, right, of the tenants like affected by ETPA. So I think the fact that Stony Run tenants have a tenants union, you know, it explains why we were able to hear from so many Stony Run tenants. Unfortunately, that's not the case at all of these properties. So you know, I think we do need to be careful not to erase the testimony that we heard from quite a few other ETPA affected properties, including specific, for instance, I have notes from one tenant at Dutch Village who had a 20% rent increase from 2019 to 2022, or reported that to us. So I just want to make sure that we recognize that we did actually hear those testimonies.
Yeah, my notes say that we heard from 8 different properties out of the 63 that are covered.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Junior. I'd like to turn to our tenant representatives. Do you have a shared presentation, or are we going to get to? All right, go ahead.
Helps. Sorry. My presentation is much more general and Michael's will be much more specific. The first thing I want to say is we can't have any delay in the vote. This is a hardship for tenants in Kingston. I'm sorry about the landlord's hardships, but the tenants of Kingston are very much affected. The judge is allowing us to proceed, and it's in the best interest of the tenants of Kingston to vote today. At Stony Run, the clock is ticking. We have received our notices postmarked November 3rd, although it was not delivered until yesterday to me. And many more are undelivered because the post office is overwhelmed and they don't know how to deliver the registered mail to 270 units. Ours alone. The base rent amount on my form had a $25 fee, $25 added to the base rent, which I'm assuming is the garbage fee that everybody heard so much about. It does not include the dishwasher that was included previously, or the centralized hot air, heat and air conditioning, which I'm sure the hedge fund landlord would like to add separately. We have enough data to make an informed decision. This is somewhat general. I know that but there are a lot of large complexes in this 62 apartments. We did hear from Dutch Village. We heard from the Ward 2 alderwoman that tenants from Chestnut were afraid to testify. Organizers have spoken with thousands of tenants across the city. We had testimony from tenants who wanted their buildings to be included in the ETPA and were not. We had expert testimony from the institutions that are policymakers on the subject, and we have the opportunity to make a one-time rent adjustment that counters the actions of so many bad landlords. If Mr. Lanzioni is a representative of the good landlords, I want to remind you that he called us scum and did whatever he could to subvert the democratic process and to scare the tenants we are struggling to protect. My husband's 401k is losing money. I'm paying inflationary prices in the market, at the gas pump, and in every facet of my life. Why should I pay for the inflation on the investments of the landlords too? I am looking at leveling the playing field based on those who have been slammed with huge rent increases since the city of Kingston began discussing the ETPA in the summer of 2019 and before that. A small rent decrease or a rent freeze doesn't meet the scope of the housing crisis. I'm looking at what I think is fair and just for the ETPA apartments in the city of Kingston and a one-time rent adjustment of 30% decrease and a look back period of 5 years. This is a one-time market adjustment that is needed to correct years of rent gouging. This is what all future rent adjustments would be applied to. We're not going to make small negative adjustments. That won't work. I think that many people did not come and testify because they were scared. And I think that it is our responsibility to protect those people. I think it is our responsibility to stabilize the rents in Kingston, and that as the board, we must act now. So that's my emotional plea for rent reduction. And I turn it over to the numbers.
You're being generous. I just want to go off of Carol's, because our presentation is largely the same. I just wanted to go off Carol's presentation, which is largely, we're asking for the same figure. So I just wanted to cite some of the data and the testimony that we received, which I do view as data because that's who came to the meetings. Landlords also had the opportunity to come. And to my understanding, 6 did, including one, Paul Merlsfelder, who is calling for a 30% rent reduction. So even if we averaged out the public testimony of what people called for, that would be approximately a 35% reduction. We decided to be a little bit more modest and call for 30. But we heard, and additionally from tenants, we heard from economists at Bard College, sociology professors, authors of sustainable development, all cited that this that a reasonable rent reduction would not negatively impact landlords in the long term. Of course, there will be short-term consequences. However, that money is almost instantly invested back into our local economy rather than being funneled to a New Jersey development or a Brooklyn development. Those people can pay their Central Hudson bill. They can paint their house, paint their apartment, which is allowed under New York state law. They can shop at our restaurants and eat at our stores. You know, there are so many benefits to this, and we were appointed because the city was cognizant that there was an emergency. We are obligated to act on this emergency. And that is a 30% rent reduction. You know, we're not going to come back next year and call for another 30% rent reduction. This is to undo the horrors of the last 5 years. What we heard from tenants that their rents were increased by 30%, 25%, 40% at all of these different complexes and single apartments, which we did hear from. I am also a resident of a non-Stony Run property. And there is all sorts of horrors that we heard that are not those make me want to puke horrors, as some people referred to it. That's people, senior citizens who have worked their whole lives, who are paying 80% of their fixed income, 70% of their fixed income. That is not a sustainable situation. We have to act. And you know, we are going to be calling for a 30% rent reduction with a 5-year look back period. We believe that's reasonable. It was cited by Legal Services of the Hudson Valley that is when this crisis really picked up steam. So it is up to us to reset that reasonable market adjustment back to before pre-COVID and even before when gentrification in the city of Kingston really took off. That is really all I have, but I'm sure there will be questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Michael. Any questions? I want to take a moment and look at the law that defines what we are to do here together today. And I would love if our friends from DHCR could make sure that I'm getting this right. I'm going to read from what I believe is the current version of the statute. A county rent guidelines board shall establish annual guidelines for rent adjustments, which at its sole discretion may be varied and different for and within the several zones and jurisdictions of the board. And in determining whether rents for housing accommodations as to which an emergency has been declared pursuant to this act shall be adjusted, shall consider, among other things, 1, the economic condition of the residential real estate industry in the affected area, including such factors as the prevailing and projected 1, real estate taxes and sewer and water rates, 2, gross operating maintenance costs, including insurance rates, government fees, cost of fuel and labor costs, 3, costs and availability of financing, including effective rates of interest, 4, overall supply of housing accommodations and overall vacancy rates, 2, relevant data from the current and projected cost of living indices for the affected area, and 3, such other data as may be available to it. My understanding of this statute, informed by what we heard from our colleagues at DHCR at the beginning of our work in our first meeting in September, is that our responsibility is to gather the information that we can, to pay particular attention to the types of data named in the statute, and to act, right? Our task is a different part of the law, referring to the setting of FMRA guidelines, suggests that we are to act as soon as possible. I want to make sure that en route to that, we do have in front of us the data that's required by law. If you'll indulge me, I like sat down today and I said, I'm gonna gather data and I'm gonna pull together as best I can from the information that we've shared among ourselves and the information that's been provided by DHCR. I've identified a couple of pieces of information that I think can be useful in helping us understand the economic conditions of the residential real estate industry in the affected area. So we are to consider real estate taxes and sewer and water rates. We have seen data from DHCR suggesting that real estate taxes in the city of Kingston, the real estate tax rates in the city of Kingston for non-homestead parcels have been in a slow decline for a decade. We have seen information that says that water and sewer rates have increased about 3 to 4% annually. Because we don't have a fine-grained set of reports about the operating costs of buildings, we may use CPI as an understanding of the cost increases that property managers and property maintenance have had. Until 2021, CPI was an average of about 1.5% annually. 2021 and 2022 have indeed seen meaningful increases in CPI, I believe 4.6% and 8 point something. I should have written those down. And 8 point something percent annually. I found it useful to contrast CPI increases with the annual increases in rent per Ulster County's annual survey of rent, and I made charts because this was helpful to me. I'm going to hold on to one and I'm going to pass some charts around. I think that's probably too many in that direction. Let's write it off. So I made charts with the two charts on the left are the change in 1 bedroom and 2 bedroom median rents in the city of Kingston, according to the Ulster County's annual rental survey. And the little gray line is CPI. And then the chart on the bottom on the left is just using 2014 as a base year, what that means for costs, right? So we can see that the CPI, like a basket of things that cost $100 in 2014 costs $125 in 2022, and the rental, $100 of rental expense by 2020 was going to cost you 140-ish. And I know that we don't trust Zillow data, but I adjusted the Zillow data to get some sense of what I thought maybe we could see in 2021 and 2022, and seems like it goes up. And then I made a chart of the Zillow data that Junior has advised us not to pay attention to. So annual increases in rent in Ulster County's annual survey have been above 10% since 2018, which should suffice to cover price increases that, while elevated, even in 2021 and 2022, are not over 10%. Costs and availability of financing. I personally have benefited from the great deal of availability of financing until spring 2022, and historic low interest rates for mortgages. We are required to consider the overall supply of housing accommodations and overall vacancy rates. We are here because of Kingston's extremely low vacancy rates. Ulster County and other nearby counties have identified region-wide shortages of housing exacerbated by an inflow of home buyers from New York City and the conversion of units into short-term rentals at an accelerating rate in the last 2 years. That data and analysis is from Ulster County and from Pattern for Progress's regional surveys. The 2021 report on residential real estate by the New York State Association of Realtors reported that Ulster County, like the rest of the state, saw very large increases in real estate prices and decreases in inventory, indicating a very tight real estate market. We are also required to consider relevant data from current and projected cost of living indices for the affected area. And as you can see, since 2018, according to Ulster County data, Kingston apartment rents have increased significantly faster than the Consumer Price Index. And since 2010, and this is the chart on the bottom right on this page, since 2010, according to the US Census Bureau's American Community Survey, there has not been a year when less than 50% of Kingston renters have paid more than 30% of their income in rent. A full 30% of Kingston renters pay more than half their income in rent. In other words, more than half of Kingston renters are rent burdened and 30% are severely rent burdened. The third piece of data that we are required to consider is other data that are being made available to us. We've seen that data in the form of the testimony from tenants and landlords at hearings that we've held. We've seen that data in the testimony from experts who provided us with their expertise in economics, sociology, right, urban planning. We like got a lot of information from experts, and we got a lot of information from our colleagues at DHCR who I really appreciated, provided us with a depth and a breadth of information that I've tried to just like give us a little tour through. The thing I want to say here is I think that we have done our statutory responsibility, which is to consider these particular types of data as we make our decision. I think that we need to make a decision that is informed by and rooted in this data. I'd love to hear suggestions about where we might move forward as a board to find an adjustment and a fair market rent appeal guideline that I imagine will be somewhere between the proposals that we've heard from our tenant colleagues and our property owner colleagues.
Just want to clarify a little bit of what you just shared. Particularly to the way that the property tax and school taxing system works. Even though the city's property tax percentage levy has been relatively flat over the last couple of years due to comprehensive reassessment done by Mr. Baker, who was just here a second ago. The actual amount of property taxes that property owners have needed to pay has gone up significantly. I actually started to map that for the properties affected here, but I didn't get it done. I was hoping to be able to present that here as well. But especially school taxes have gone up very, very significantly. All properties that are under the review of this board are non-homestead and pay the highest rate of taxes in the city of Kingston. Also, in regards to the cost of capital, it should be noted that commercial notes don't work the same way that your regular 30-year home mortgage does. They're typically floating notes. So now that rates are going up significantly, the the cost of capital that an owner is paying on one of those properties is likely to go up significantly. And as I'm sure everybody is aware of, the cost of capital has more than tripled in the last couple of months. So to be aware of that, it's an important a lot of people look at it from the basic homeowner perspective, and it's not the same when you're talking about commercial property, which all of these properties are.
I'm hearing two things. I'm hearing Junior say that property taxes are going up, and I'm hearing Noah saying that property taxes have gone down. So what am I to think?
Property tax rates have gone down, but property values have gone up, or assessed property values have gone up, which means that both the buildings that people own are more valuable, and that they pay a larger number of dollars in tax, even when they pay a smaller rate of tax.
So to be clear, the property owners who we will make decisions about their rates, their tax rates have gone up. They are paying more in taxes.
They are paying less tax per $1,000 of assessed value. The assessed value has also changed.
And in dollars of cents, they'll be paying more. Yes.
Yeah, to the tune of at least 4-ish% or more a year over year at minimum. Yeah, 4%, especially in terms of school property taxes. Yeah, which have continued to go up. The city property tax levy has been relatively flat, but the school rate has changed. I pay it every year. It goes up.
No, this chart that you gave us, these two on the left-hand side, the top is what the rents are and the bottom is to represent what a landlord's costs. Is that what you're saying?
None of this represents landlord's costs. The top chart represents the change in median rent for a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom apartment in the city of Kingston, according to the Ulster County's rental housing survey. And the chart below shows what the result of those annual changes are, right? So if something's going up 5% a year, right? Or so, okay, so looking at the, I wish I had a color printer. So there's a curve that goes above 10% first on the top left. That curve represents a 10% increase, or a more than 10% increase in price for the median, whichever 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment in the city of Kingston between 2017 and 2018. And then the next year, there was a decrease in the price of in the rent of a median apartment of the same number of bedrooms. Over time, the each year's percentage change accumulates, right? If something goes up, 5% one year and then 10% the year after that, it's gone up to. And so the bottom chart
Compound
represents
interest.
the compound. Yeah.
So none of these charts represent property owners' expenses.
No. Except CPI, the consumer price index, is included as the light gray line on the left-hand side.
Thank you, Noah, for taking the time to make these graphs for us. This is really helpful. And yeah, I think that it's, I also appreciated you just reminding us of our statutory responsibility. We were told when we first met that this year, right, the state would not be able to do the survey of all of the ETPA buildings, right, which we can expect in future years. That does seem to be the only piece of data that we are missing, right? And we knew we were missing it when we signed up for this job. We knew that we wouldn't have it this first year, right? And yet that we would be able to gather data. In fact, that it was our responsibility to gather data in order to make a decision in a timely manner, right? Because we know that tenants are, you know, already being asked to sign on to new leases, right, or already having their rents increased illegally, and that in order for this law to actually be impactful, right, to actually make a difference to the people that it's meant to make a difference to, it's important that we act in a timely manner. So we all knew that from the beginning when we decided to accept this responsibility, and we accepted the responsibility to gather data actively, which some of us have done. We have also, you know, had 2 public hearings, so we've had a huge amount of information. Do we have all of the possible information that we could have in order to make this decision? No, but we knew that we wouldn't from the outset, right? And so nothing has changed. And I think our responsibility is still to make the best decision we can with the best data that we can gather. Looking at this data and the data that we were presented with, you know, what some things that seem clear to me are that, you know, rent increases have gone up more than 10% each year since 2018. Which covers the price increases that we can expect that, you know, landlords experience during that time period. And we know that actually, you know, since 2018, that it's been more than a 10% increase each year, right? We have a basis for believing that. We have the data that it's been that people have seen a 50% increase for 2 bedrooms from 2016 to 2020, and we have reason to believe that it's been more steep since then. So you discount the Zillow data. I'm not sure, you know, that we should completely discount that data. But, you know, given that that is what we have from 2020 to the present, and it shows a 30% increase, right, from September 2020 to September 2022, we're looking at, you know, an 80% increase since 2016, right? For average rent for a 2-bedroom. And we can say like, oh, maybe the Zillow numbers maybe they're on the high side. All right, so what are we looking at, a 60% increase then, right? That still covers what we can assume the increase in, you know, inflation and CPI, right, has been in that time period. So on the basis of the data that we have, I think a significant rent decrease is reasonable, more than reasonable. And I think the question is, what does that decrease look like?
Mike, do you mind if I put you on the spot? What are you thinking about?
I don't know. I gotta be honest. There's a lot of information that I think we're missing. I'm gonna be honest. As a tenant and a member of the public, I just don't feel like that we have the information needed from the landlord side of things at a more deeper level. And I think we just need to try to get that information, as like Anthony was saying, that rents are on freeze. I just think it's important that we try to get as much information as possible, as quickly as possible.
So this rental emergency started by the city on August 1 of this year. So the rental emergency was determined by the city starting August 1 this year. In that time period, we have been appointed. We have had now 3 meetings, including 2 public hearings. It's been 2 months since that start time. It's actually been 3. Landlords have had time. They have shown that they're not interested in providing data to this board because they view it as illegitimate. And they have had that opportunity to come in good faith and provide data, and they have not done so. That's not our problem. Why are we discounting the nearly 100 tenants who came when, why are we giving them less water than we're giving these imaginary landlords who don't live in our community, who have, decided to circumvent the process by filing a lawsuit saying that we have no right to even make these decisions. So I really do find some difficulty with, we can't be waiting on people who aren't acting in good faith.
Perhaps they had that time to actively be part of this situation. Sorry. Do they not want to speak because of the lawsuit? I don't know why they wouldn't want to be part of this at all. If that's the case, I mean, with only 8 out of the 63 properties represented, I just don't believe that there's enough information from that side. We're just saturated with tenant stories and not enough active data. I just don't think so.
I'd like to ask our colleagues at DHCR, what is the response rate generally to the annual registrations that landlords answer annual surveys, and that's the data that this board and all other boards get. What's the response rate for those surveys? Peter says that it's generally in the 40% range in Westchester and Rockland counties, and he doesn't have detailed information about the other boards because they're not the place where he works all the time.
I ask a question of the DHCR people. There was a question on whether or not you'd be able to accept FML fair market rent appeals without a guideline. Is there an answer on that?
Yes, tenants would be able to go online and file the RA 89, check off the fair market rent and put in Kingston, and it would be a placeholder for them for the 90 days. So the fee, what I've gotten from Saturday and today is that at least in Stony Run, tenants have begun to receive those certified mails. So they would be able to save their spot to file a fair market rent appeal with the additional information if the board doesn't do it today.
So just to clarify that, a tenant could preserve their right to a fair market rent appeal by filing that form now, whether or not we make a ruling in this moment. And a tenant is also protected against a rent change from August 1st until we make a guideline ruling.
Yes, and tenants are already protected from a change in rent just by the fact that the city adopted ETPA. No landlord should be giving an increase as of August 1st until the board sets a guideline.
Thank you.
I would like to return to our responsibility, which is, and this is section 9B of the relevant law, which says the Rent Guidelines Board shall promulgate as soon as practicable after its creation guidelines for the determination of fair market rents for housing accommodations, as to which an application may be made pursuant to this subdivision, et cetera. The law does ask that we act as soon as practicable. At our first meeting, I believe we were advised to be speedier than we ended up scheduling. I think that we scheduled at the sort of slow end of the process that was recommended. I think that we are at the limits of what I think is reasonable as soon as practicable. I would encourage us to make a decision about fair market rent appeals and annual adjustments either today or on Monday.
And just to add to that, we specifically chose to wait from that first meeting several weeks to a month and a half to get that data. That's why we waited. We could have met, a week later, but we wanted to get that data. And so we did, and we have it. So I really don't see the need to continue to wait for people who are never going to give it to us.
I'm wondering if it would make sense, we're having two discussions, like we're having one discussion about the time frame and we're having another discussion about the adjustment and the look back period. Maybe would it make sense to, if Junior or anyone else wants to make a motion to delay, that we resolve that question so that we can decide if we're actually making the decision this evening?
Yeah, I would entertain a motion to delay.
There was one other question for DHCR on whether or not you would hold the data of the survey that I proposed roughly a month ago. Is that something that DHCR can do?
I believe at the last meeting, it came up as a subject. Can you guys hear me? Okay. At the last meeting, it came up. The agency offered to take the data from your survey and also send data to the owners. A survey to the owners, whether or not they answer it, I don't know. It's the same question that's come up, but it would be the same thing for the tenants. So if that's something the board wants to do, then the board can consider that. And I understand the concern you guys have. The agency previously had advised the board that they would be willing to do this, to do the survey, to manage the survey. The problem is that no individual on either side of this table can do it themselves. There's at least 9 different laws that require DHCR to maintain the privacy of that information. So they would take the data that you had, the survey that you had, and they would also provide a survey to the owners. Who submits answers to that? I can't give you any information to that, but yes, they would be willing to do that.
If that is a thing that this board is interested in doing, it would require a delay. I will entertain a motion to delay if someone wants to make one.
I would make a motion to delay to allow DHCR to administer the survey that we have been asking whether or not it was legal for us to do for weeks now. I would propose something no more than 30 days. But I think that that's probably plenty enough time to get the surveys out and hopefully get them filled out.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Just, yeah, just to clarify, I mean, my, concern in addition to the question of, our responsibility to make a decision as efficiently as possible is that while Junior is great and has clearly has like, software, lots of software, making what is this? Has expertise that is relevant to like creating the like platform for the survey. Like I don't, if I have concerns about us, asking the state to administer a survey that is not created by anyone who is an expert in, making or administering surveys on this question, right? So it's a different, what is on the table is not, just to be clear, the 90-day process that DHCR will administer in the future going forward, but an expedited, non-professional like survey through a form created by a landlord representative on the board. So I feel like that is, that I have concerns about how legitimate the results of that survey will be. And I think we should take that into consideration.
Thank you, Mia. I have a question for our colleagues at DHCR. Do you think that this board, given the data that we have considered, and the information in front of us, have we fulfilled our statutory responsibility to consider the types of data named in the law?
I would just simply answer that by saying that's not really our call to make. So I'm going to hold back on making any opinion to that effect.
Yep. Peter said that it is not his opinion to make.
So just, I did take your survey, Junior, and I thought it was very thoughtful. I thought the survey that you had was very thoughtful, but I would not be comfortable having a survey issued that we didn't see the questions of, we didn't know exactly who it was going out to, and that would require us to make a motion to approve a survey, which would require another publicly noticed meeting. And during that time, the proceedings against residents of 58 Fair Street are going to keep going. There's real human cost to waiting. And I just don't think that, what we're waiting for is not going to achieve the result that we all wish it would.
I do just want to clarify that to my understanding, any ruling we make will not make any change to what's happening at 58 Fair Street. Only the ruling of a judge will, which hopefully is going to happen. I think that what is happening over there is egregious. But I do, to my understanding, us making a ruling changes nothing there.
We are discussing a motion that has been proposed and seconded to delay. Any other discussion of the motion on the table? Hearing none, I will call the question. Carol. Sorry, the question is, Junior, will you repeat the motion?
I would like to make a motion to delay in order to have DHCR administer a survey. And I guess also an additional survey to landlords, which I haven't seen, but they said they would do, up to 30 days, but no more than that, for us to be able to review additional information from more properties and us to be able to make a more complete decision.
Carol.
I vote no delay.
Michael.
No.
Mike.
Yes.
No. Deanna.
No.
Mia.
No.
Yes.
Well,
Yes.
I didn't count. Thank you. The motion fails. And we return to our discussion towards figuring out where we're going to start proposing motions for an an annual rent adjustment and a fair market rent appeal guideline. Did I get that right? I would love to hear suggestions of where and why we might pick specific numbers for either of those things that we're considering.
We have two numbers, one from Tara and one from the tenants. So maybe both of them can make their motions and see how they fly.
I'll be open to hearing a motion. Let's start with a motion. I will accept a motion on a annual adjustment. I'm open to hearing someone propose a motion on an annual adjustment.
We're talking about going forward, not into a look back period.
I make a motion going forward, a 5% increase.
Is that a 5% increase for a 1-year lease? Is that a 5% increase for a 1-year lease and a 2-year? Remember, we need to propose adjustments for 1- and 2-year leases that start between August 1st, 2023 and September 30th. Sorry, August 1st, 2022 and September 30th, 2023. We need a 1-year lease adjustment and a 2-year lease adjustment.
Okay, I make a motion for 5% the first year adjustment. I'd make a motion for 5% for the first year adjustment and another 5% for the second year lease.
So a 5% adjustment for a 1-year lease and a 5% adjustment for a 2-year lease.
Yes.
Great. Any seconds?
Second,
Any discussion?
I wonder, I'm just trying to do the math in my head on whether or not it is important for us to make a ruling on going forward without looking back first. Because then if we have, in the event that there is a long look back period with a lower rate, then do we need to, how does that affect us going forward?
Junior, I would suggest that you could make a motion to table the motion that we are currently discussing in order to make a different motion for us to consider or to continue our informal conversation without a motion on the table. But we do have a motion that has been made and seconded. And so we need to discuss that motion until we decide what to do with it. Speaking for myself, I'm very hesitant to consider a 5% adjustment. I think that the data that we have showing the real rent burdenness of tenants in our community and the hugely escalating rents over the past couple of years make me really reluctant to support that motion.
Do we need to vote on that motion, or can we propose an alternative?
You could make a friendly amendment to that motion, or you could make a motion to table the motion that is currently being discussed. You could table it to a different time in this meeting, or you could call the vote. Although, like, we have more experts on Robert's rules here than me, I'm doing my very best But I would defer to our experts in Robert's rules from DHCR. And also I feel like Michael is a real expert in Robert's rules. But I think those are the things that we need to do is because there's a motion on the table, we need to discuss it and only it, and then do something with it.
On the discussion, I believe that in our current state that's a little I think a more modest proposal would be more palatable.
I'd like to call the question, Chairman. I'd like to call the question, Chairman.
Great, let's call the question. Carol, sorry, the motion, Tara, will you repeat the motion?
Make a motion for 5% for the first year lease and 5% for the second year lease.
This is as an
Increase for 1 year and 10% for a 2 year? Because the way it's done is you get a 1 year lease or you get a 2 year lease, and you need an increase depending on what lease the person signed.
For either one, 5% for either one. 5 for both. Yep.
Carol,
I vote no.
Michael,
No.
Mike,
No.
no, Deanna,
No.
yeah,
No.
No.
Tara.
Yes.
No.
The motion fails. Thank you so much, Tara.
Chairman, I would ask, and if it's okay with HCR, that rather than take time to just vote no on motions, we stick with casual straw polls. I would ask that rather than make motions and consume time just for the sake of motions and voting no, that we would stick to casual straw polls, if that's allowed. I believe it is. But I think it's just, that was a lot of time just to have a 9-1 vote.
Great. I would love to hear other people's ideas about what specific numbers we should do for either. I guess I'm open to Junior's suggestion that we discuss fair market rent appeal guidelines first.
I guess I'll go next. So I just want to, thank tenants and landlords that came out and gave their testimony and submitted as well. But with everything that we have, to me, it seems reasonable, like a 30% reduction and a 5-year look back period. And I am open to negotiation compromise if with others. But I think that, tenants, they have to be protected. And I understand that small homeowners also need to be protected. But I think that, I don't see like a big, from them not making a income or gain money from it. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Deanna.
I think I really appreciate, the landlord presentations and tenant presentations. It's important, obviously, that we make a decision that has a reasonable basis in the evidence that we have and that is fair, that takes into consideration the interests and needs of landlords and tenants. I think that, on the basis of the data that we do have, it seems to suggest that since 2016, we've seen, you know, upwards of a 60% increase in rents for a 2-bedroom apartment, right? So it seems to me, you know, that based on the information we have about CPI and real estate taxes and sewer and water rates, that you know, landlords have certainly been, you know, making a great deal of profit, right, since 2018, and that this rapid increase in the rents is not sustainable, right, and it needs to be stabilized. And so I think on the basis of that data, a 30% decrease is reasonable. I think it can be justified, and landlords are should be able to absorb that given what's happened over the past 5 years.
Thank you, Mia. We've heard numbers from I guess I haven't named a number. But Mike, I'm curious where you're coming from. Arlene, Junior, what are you thinking?
So my thoughts, and can I give a number of? Okay, so what I'm thinking is just going forward in the leases to come in the future. I'm thinking 5% on a 1-year lease and a 3.5% on a 2-year lease being reasonable going forward.
Sorry, 5%, a positive 5%, a negative 5%.
A positive 5% going in the future only, yeah. And 3.5% on a 2-year.
I just have a question, like what is the basis for those numbers in your view?
Rent stabilization. Just trying to get a sound ground number that everybody can kind of work with. And if that's going forward, that's one thing, but rent rollback and decrease is a different subject that we're talking about. So annually going forward, and rent raises, I mean, everything's going to have to go up at some point, and we have to cover some of that. Whether landlords recoup from that completely, I don't know. And a tenant won't, obviously, but as a ground break somewhere to make it fair for somewhere in the middle, I'm thinking that's where I'm coming from on those numbers. As far as rent rollback, I don't know yet.
Carol, go ahead.
I just want to point out that it is possible to have a rental adjustment that is not an increase. It's been very conclusive that landlords have been making a lot of money over a lot of years and have increased that amount, and that they care very little for who gets put out onto the street, homelessness and things like that. And so I think that a rent reduction is the only answer for a one-time market adjustment.
And just to speak further to that, so we heard from person after person who stated that, they pay 30% of their income, 35% of their income. Obviously, I'm going to highlight Mrs. Rosie, who lives on a fixed income and pays 80% of that. A 5% increase is simply unaffordable to them. And that pushes people to make health choices that damages them. We're here to set the rents, but there are consequences. We keep talking about how much the cost of paint is going to go up, but there is human health costs to increasing rents beyond sustainable means, which they're already unsustainable. So I do feel like we're obligated to roll back the rent, and it's not a rollback. This is a adjustment for 1 and 2 year leases. We are perfect, as Carol said, we're perfectly allowed to have a negative rental adjustment, and I strongly urge the board to consider that.
I kind of want to piggyback off of what Carol just said, and I think that I want to piggyback off of what Carol just said, and I think that it's important to recognize the types of property owners that we're dealing with, and when you've got a local property owner, it is much more likely that that individual is going to care about whether or not somebody goes out on the street and whether or not somebody is struggling in that particular housing situation. They're your neighbor, they're somebody that you might know that person's in face, you might see them because they live down the block. If we create a situation where if we do a big rent decrease, the large corporations are going to be able to figure it out. They will either declare bankruptcy, they will liquidate their assets. I'm not worried about the billionaires that and whether or not they're going to be able to handle this. I'm sure that the owners behind the Kingston Village Group are going to be fine no matter what we say, right? I am concerned about what happens to the local and smaller owners and what happens to them and if they're pushed to insolvency, because what's going to end up happening is the only person willing to take the risk, the only organization willing to take the risk to take on those properties if those people need to liquidate are going to be the larger corporations that will be able to deal with losses over a period of time and hope for something's going to appreciate. And we lose local control and we lose local that money coming back into our local economy, and we might inadvertently over time exacerbate the exact problem that we're trying to fix. I just want to put that in everyone's head and really think about that. I wish we could make 2 different classes of guidelines. I really do.
I'm to quickly rebuttal. So there's no evidence that happened. There's no evidence that happens. What you're referring to, that just has not happened in Ossining, that has not happened in Westchester. There are still small landlords in those communities, and we heard time and time again, most of those people who were being evicted were being evicted by a small landlord. So I do sympathize with somebody who bought a house, but unfortunately that's just the way we have to make these laws. Those tenants help the local economy just as much, and if not more. And like I said before, if we put more money in their pockets, they're the ones going to our stores, they're the ones going to our restaurants. It's the working class that drives the economy. I just don't see, your nightmare scenario coming to fruition.
It's not a nightmare scenario, but it's it's pumping that money out of the economy. It's when those small local incremental development that our county and our city is working hard to try to promote. If that no longer becomes solvent, then only large corporations are going to be able to invest in that kind of housing. And we know that is the trend that has been happening nationwide for decades now. That's what is putting us in this type of a situation to begin with. And I think it's what we all really want to avoid, right? We don't want any rent, even if it's a reduced rent, that people are paying getting pumped out of our local economy. And that's what is eventually going to happen if we're only looking at large corporations, if we're only looking at Zillows buying up houses. That is a trend that has happened nationwide.
Thank you, Junior. And I want to remind us that this board's purview is setting the annual adjustment for 1 and 2 year leases signed in the period of time that I can sometimes get out of my mouth, and setting a fair market rent adjustment. We have the responsibility to do that, and we have no capacity to do anything else. Looking at the data, I see really clearly that rents are unaffordable. Rents have escalated significantly in recent years, and I think that our responsibility, when I'm thinking about our responsibility, I think our responsibility is in some part, our responsibility is to adjudicate a zero-sum game between landlords and tenants, right? Like every percent that we reduce rent is a decrease in landlord income. Every percent we increase rent is a reduction in the money that tenants can spend on food and medicine and, you know, occasional vacations, right? And I hate that, right? I don't like the fact that that's where we're at, but that is where we're at. And looking at the way that the housing market in recent years has been, the way that landlords have been winning in the housing market and tenants have been suffering in the housing market, and I think in ways that don't match the best estimate I can come up with for reasonable cost increases. I think that a modest negative rent adjustment is an appropriate response to the facts that are in front of us. I would suggest a -5% adjustment for 1-year leases and a -5% adjustment for 2-year leases. I think that a smaller decrease in rent would not match the facts on the ground, right? I think a smaller decrease in rent would be an inadequate response to the data that we have in front of us. And I think that a whole lot larger of a decrease in rent would threaten the stability of the rental market, the way that we've seen the 10% increases, the who knows what percent increases, because we don't have data on them, that have happened over the past couple of years without the interventions of this board. I think that we've seen real destabilization in the rental market in Kingston. And I think I see a responsibility to do some stabilization in the rental market in line with the data in front of us. And I think a -5% adjustment is a reasonable response to the facts on the ground.
I think I could agree that your proposal might be within the range of something I could consider reasonable. I would like to make one other clarification. There was some talk about whether or not we could set a guideline for properties that included utilities and ones that did not. I think that that's a careful consideration because if a property owner is paying for utilities in this current market, that could be very significant. And that's really a different game for one paying utilities and one that's not. We can do that, right? Yeah. Okay. Just making sure.
Arlene, Mike, what do you think about? that pitch.
I have nothing intelligent to add to the discussion.
Yeah, I'm not gonna comment yet.
So we highlighted a lot of the data about area median income and rent burdening, which it's not. So we highlighted and spoke about the percentage of our neighbors who are rent burdened and severely rent burdened. I would like to point out that that's not a hard number. You don't instantly become rent burdened at 30%. So, you know, you are struggling just as much and are a paycheck, you know, are a car accident or a firing or a health incident away from losing your home. And so, which at the end of the day, we keep calling them units, but these are people's homes. And so I don't think in this climate that a 5% is really enough, you know, for those residents who are on fixed incomes and are paying 60-70% of their income. A 5% reduction still means that they are paying more than half of their life just to have a roof over their head. I really think that needs to be strongly considered.
I'm the chair. I'm going to give myself permission to respond. I think you're right, Michael. I think that you're absolutely right that that for many people, a 5% reduction isn't the difference between being able to make rent and not make rent. I would suggest that there's room to meet the particularly egregious escalations of rent, to intervene in those using the fair market rent appeal guidelines. And I would make a pitch for thinking about a relatively modest annual adjustment and pairing it with a fair market rent appeal guideline that we think could curtail the worst abuses that we've seen, and I would make a pitch for that, the combination of a relatively long look back and a relatively modest negative adjustment as a meaningful way to intervene in both the market as a whole and in the specific circumstances of individuals. Yeah.
So Chairman, and you can feel free to. So Chairman, you can please feel free to cut me off. But so we came in with -30. We have heard from 2 members of the public who believe that -30 is reasonable. I think we should just, I don't want to make a motion, but I would like that a straw poll for a 30% rent reduction, because it seems like you're meeting the certain class of people a lot closer to where they are than you are to us. So I would like a straw poll of 30%. I don't know, you know, hot or cold, but I think we've heard from a significant number of board members.
Carol, what do you think about -30?
I am hot for 30%.
That's it. Michael,
So I would support a 30% rent reduction.
Mike,
No, I don't support 30%.
I also
I do
Mike said
not
no.
support.
I also don't support a 30% rent reduction.
I would support a 30% reduction. I would support a 30% reduction.
I would support a 30% reduction.
No, I wouldn't.
I would not support a 30% reduction.
I would not.
We have a responsibility to come to 5 votes. Yeah, Mia.
So I do recognize and the concerns that Junior and Noah have shared about okay, so first, what I think is that 30% is reasonable based on the data. And I want us to, I haven't really heard anyone challenge that, right? In terms of how much we have seen, rents go up in the past 5 years, right? And compared to inflation and the cost of living. The concerns that Noah and Junior are raising are about something else, which is the repercussions, right, for the housing market and for landlords, right? And I think that's important to take into consideration. And so, I am open to, I think we should talk about more modest decreases. I don't think that -5 is at all sufficient, like a 5% reduction to the kind of burden, like extreme burden that tenants are carrying, right? And to the rapid increase in rents that we've seen over the past 5 years. And I don't think that we should, if this is part of your thinking, Noah, I don't think that we should try to do multiple small reductions over a period of years. I think this is we should think of this as one opportunity to try to correct the really extreme increase that we've seen over the past 5 years. And from this point on, I expect that we'll be making, adjustments that are, probably, we'll probably be looking at freezes or modest positive adjustments, right? But I think we should take this opportunity to actually, try to make a difference to tenants' ability to live in Kingston, right? And not have to leave. And so to me, I think what I would propose and want to see if we can kind of meet more folks at something like a 15% decrease, which I think would be significant. I think it would make a difference to tenants' ability to, survive and live in Kingston. And I also think that landlords can absorb that, right? I think that landlords can, given the profits that they've made over the past 5 years, would certainly be able to absorb a 15% decrease this year.
I'm comfortable with that.
I'm not comfortable with a decrease of any kind. Excuse me.
I'm still caught up on if we're proposing, depending on the look back that we propose and whatever the rate is from the look back, that is effectively a decrease. So I think that I don't think that we can look at any proposal going forward until that's been established, because you will end up compounding a negative adjustment in the event that both things happen.
Mia, did you want to continue it on a sort of straw poll of do you want to
Sure, yeah, I'd like
Okay,
to know
great.
what other people think about 15.
Carol, where are you at on 15? And you have to turn it on.
My bottom number is 20% right now.
We said 15 right now.
Yeah.
I'm a little hesitant, but I think it's closer than 5.
No on the 15. No.
I want another minute to think, so I'm going to punt to you, Deanna.
I would support.
I think Mia, I think we're close. One thing that I didn't that like matters to me is fairness. And I think this is something that Junior's hinting at in thinking about like what's the relationship between the fair market rent appeal guidelines and the annual adjustment. I think that if we set a fair market rent appeal guideline that says, right, like for like just as an example, for a 4-year look back period, a maximum of 5% adjustments, or 5% increases over that, and 5% annual increases over that period of time for the tenants who have had rent increases meaningfully higher than that. That fair market rent appeal process is a huge correction to their rent, right? And that changes the rent effective August 1st. It gets refunded the amount of rent over the guideline for the 2 years, for up to 2 years before the effective date, before that August 1st. And then the annual adjustment that we set gets applied to the post fair market rent appeal initial legal regulated rent, right? So I think Junior's right in naming a long look back period is a correction to those 20% rent increases that we've heard of. And so when I think about a 15%, a negative adjustment of 15%, I hear like that is inadequate to bring the rents at the places that we've heard of that have raised rents and raised rents and raised rents beyond what's reasonable, causing the housing emergency in Kingston. It's an inadequate response to those unfair market rents. And for buildings where the rent hasn't gone up that much, and we don't have evidence that there are those buildings, we don't know anything about whether or not there are those buildings. But for buildings where the rent has not gone up at an enormous pace, a negative 15% adjustment feels unfair to landlords who were better behaved. Yeah.
I think, the fair market rent appeal is fairer in the sense, a fairer or more precise tool than the decrease, in the sense that it is case by case. But there are huge problems with it as well. One being that complicated to figure out what you need to do and what it is and how to file it, right? And so we've discussed this as a board. We've looked at the forms. It's pretty confusing. There's a short window for filing we're already well into for filing those forms. And so I think it's unfortunately unlikely that many tenants will be able to make use of it. It also takes a long time, from what I understand, to process, right? And we know that we're in an emergency, which means that people are being evicted now, right? And potentially having to move out of Kingston. And so, we need to do something this year that addresses the extent of the emergency, which is why I think that 15% as a reduction is necessary.
I think that the let's say the fair market rent appeal process works the way that it should and the way that it's designed, as far as I understand it, you very well, let's say we set a even mildly significant look back period, and what would be, I mean, based on, let's say, the 5% number that we use for egregious rent increases in just cause eviction here in the city of Kingston, if we consider that to be the guideline, which it is the marker for all non-regulated properties in the city of Kingston, it is certainly feasible that a number of tenants that have had egregious rent increases may get a reduction of more than 30%. And so I think that it is the correct tool, given the toolbox that we have, in order to correct those situations. I do, I guess, before I say that with any confidence, from DHCR's point of view, if somebody files a fair market rent appeal, can they get a new lease until that's done, or does that process hold their new lease at the August 1st rent until that's finished?
Can you restate your question?
If someone files a fair market rent appeal, can their rent change differently than it was on August 1st before the fair market rent appeal process is completed? Or is their rent locked in at the August 1st when ETPA was in effect here until the fair market rent appeal process is done?
They would have to pay rent because otherwise the owner would be able to evict them.
Yeah.
Like
The August 1st rent.
the August 1st. rent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they would be, the guideline is whatever you guys set, right? So you set a guideline, you set a fair market rent appeal, and you set a percentage. I think there's some confusion on a rent rollback. You guys are not going to send a rent rollback. What you're going to do is set a guideline increase for a 1 year and a 2 year lease. So any leases that come up during that period would be whatever guideline you set, but it's not across the board to everybody. And I can't tell if that's what everybody gets or doesn't get. So if you set a guideline, a fair market rent appeal going back whatever time period it is, and you set a percentage for what a rent increase could be during that time. So hypothetically, your earlier question was like a $1,200 rent, right? If you set a 2 year look back period and you said, in that 2 year period, nobody could have more than a 5% increase. If an owner collected more than that 5% during that period, the tenant would file the fair market rent appeal. The agency would issue an order rolling the rent back to whatever their rent was previously, plus whatever number you guys have picked as that number. Okay, so
can I just play devil's advocate with the numbers? Like, somebody's paying $1,200 now. Let's just say 2 years ago they were paying $800. They file the fair market rent appeal. DHCR says your rent started at $800. You got a 5% increase year over year after that, and that's what your rent should be now.
nobody said year after year. You guys set a guideline, you set a guideline number. That's the number for that time period. So it's not per year.
Oh,
number.
I see. That
That's the
changes
number you guys
everything.
said it, right? So if you said in your example, 2 years ago, my rent was $800
Mhm.
and this board sets a guideline look back period of 2 years and a percentage increase, whatever that percentage is, gets added to the $800, and anything that's over that number, the tenant files a fair market rent appeal and the owner is directed to refund that amount of money to the tenants.
What about in tenancies that have been, what about folks who started renting that apartment in a period of time shorter than the look back period?
Your look back period is whatever, anything,
So if we say a
so say
three-year look
hypothetically,
back,
pick a height- You say HISPA came into Kingston, because that's when you were allowed to opt in, was 2019. Any leases that were signed between 2019 and the day you guys do this, any increases that were over whatever percentage you sign, you agree to, those tenant, it's not just a tenant on the date you set it, it's a rolling period. So it's from the date your look back period is, it's anytime during that look back period, the tenant could file a fair market rent appeal.
And so if a tenant, let's say we pick that 2019 date, if a tenant moved in January 1, 2021, how would the percentage, would that be adjusted, or would it just be like it's the look back percentage, or sorry, the fair market rent appeal guideline percentage of whatever 5% is true whether you were in the unit for 3 years or for 2 years or for 1 year? It's just
It's within
it's a
that
number.
time
Okay.
period, within the fair market rent appeal look
Right.
back time.
Thank you.
So just to come back to this question that we're talking about, which is the 15%. Oh no, sorry, not, it's just, yeah. So we were talking about the question of the possibility of a 15% decrease. It sounds like Diana and Arlene and I and Michael are on board with that. We're not sure about Carol and Noah, or Carol is not, and Noah is not. So then Carol had said 20%. Should we do that? Should we discuss that as a straw poll for 20?
I don't want to be so out of line with everybody. I would definitely come down to 15%. I just think, it's very hard for me to say that because of the community that I come from and how many apartments have been vacated, and how when you complain about anything that happens in the building, that they just offer you a $1,800 rent, which is usually a $800 more. That this is the situation that I'm facing. So but I'm willing to, I do the one-time adjustment for 15%, and I just hope that Noah would come along.
I didn't say I was in favor of 15. I think that, the fair market rent appeal is not a guarantee. My landlord, I have no idea how much they rented it for before I moved in. And I know that it was in a significantly worse condition. I got remodeled, so that would be something that can change into the cost. However, my rent still remains unaffordable, even though they had to do this remodel to make it a habitable place. That's just my own example. And even this remodel, half the outlets don't work and there's leaks in the ceiling. So I think that fair market rent appeal is not this savior that I think it was. We all just nodded and said, yes, it is, but it's not. In addition to it being arduous, it takes time. And like I said, there's a chance for, it's not a guarantee. It's not an instant. The landlord, I believe, in my opinion, the landlord and the tenant are on perfectly equal footing in a fair market rent appeal. That still does not resolve the fact that the rent is currently unaffordable and that this is a one-time market adjustment, which ultimately I think is more stable for the market than a consistent negative rental adjustment of minor increments year after year. This is a one-time thing. So I would prefer something closer to 20.
Okay, so we have then 4. Okay, all right. So do you want to propose a different number for us to discuss?
I would prefer that we measure 20 rather than 18, sort of the temp check. I would prefer 20. I feel like it's
Would
fair.
anybody else come up to 20% is the question.
I would.
I would too as well.
No.
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 No. No.
Yeah, I'm also at no. I uh
Yeah, I just want to share a thought as well. And understand that a lot of tenants are suffering with a lot of personal experiences of not having working outlets, or, whatever the case may be. Uh, it, it doesn't matter what percentage we pick, that's not going to fix that problem. In fact, it may even make it worse. And that's my concern on going too high on this percentage. Safety is really important when it comes to that, and just not the economy, but your personal safety is involved with that. If they're not doing it now, they're not going to do it when you're paying less. Well, that's a good question. No, I understand that, but there's a lot of costs. And, in your particular case and only 8 other particular cases that we know of where people are complaining in certain circumstances. I don't think it covers everybody as a whole. And I think personal experiences and pulling a number out from personal experiences, I don't think. we
Sure,
should have that.
I just meant that as, while my landlord does neglect to provide basic repairs to my apartment, which I pay more than a third of my income on. I just meant that as an example that a fair market rent appeal would give my landlord a far more say, whatever we set that, percentage above whatever it was X year ago, he, or I should say they, because they're a faceless mega conglomerate from New Jersey. They are on a much better footing to not give me money back because they made these on paper improvements. So that's the only point I meant by it, was that the fair market rent appeal is not this guarantee that we all seem to agree a few minutes ago that it was. It's just simply not that. So I apologize for, inserting my own personal story for that example. I just thought it was the easiest in that moment. So I please feel free to disregard that.
Okay, so we don't have 5 votes for 20. I think, do the tenants, or does anyone do you guys want to make more of a case for 20, or do you want to propose another number? Otherwise, I think we should, go to back to 15 and think about the look back period.
I'm not pleased with it, but that's compromise. So I would be, hearing that you guys are not on board for 20, I would be okay with 15.
Junior, do you have some sense of what an appropriate fair market rent appeal guideline might be that could get you on board with a 15% annual adjustment?
Well, I don't know about a 15%. If you're talking about going forward, I think that's just not tenable. I would like to propose a look back period up to discussion with a compounding 5% adjustment based on however much time annual adjustment based on however much time we say that look back period goes back. So let's say it's 1 year, it's 5%. If it's 2, because now I'm just learning that this is not compounding. I thought it was annual before, and now it's a one number thing. So we've got to do some math on that. But I feel like there's this talk of this big decrease number, and the devil's in the details of how the math works out on the different things that we're doing. And I also really think that we need to think significantly about utility included and non-utility included properties. And I haven't got through my head on how that would look in a look back, but I feel like doing any type of negative adjustment on a utility included property going forward, it would be detrimental to any property owner.
So Junior, a 4-year look back at 5% annually would be a 4-year look back with a 21% cap on reasonable adjustments. Did I get that about right? Yes. Do you want to like take the temperature of a 4-year look back with 20%, which would be about 5% annual increases? Sorry, 21%. 4-year.
I think,
21%.
I think doing it from 2019 would be pretty palatable, so it would be 3 years, but I would be agreeable to a 3-year look back with 5% per annum compounding, which is probably roughly 16-ish percent, I'm gonna guess. So maybe 17. Which for a number of people, if they got a fair market rent appeal, would probably be for the people with most egregious rent increases, would be a very significant discount based on what they're paying right now. And for those that not, then they're paying a fair rate as far as I feel.
I would love to do a temperature check on a 3-year look back with a 16%. What do we call it? Can you give me the word?
Guideline.
A fair market rent appeal guideline with a look back of 3 years and a maximum adjustment, a maximum increase in rent of 16% over those 3 years. Is that, Carol, do you have feelings about that as a look back?
In the sun. I would go for a 3-year look back at 18%.
I said 16.
I said 18.
Okay, great. All right. That's higher. You know that is allowing a greater increase in rent.
You want to say 14.
I would say 14.
All right, 14. Great.
I think that I could be amenable to that. I would prefer a longer year with I would prefer a longer period over maybe a higher percentage. I think the turnover rate in the city of Kingston is, we're kind of excluding a lot of people if we set it to, sorry, I feel like I'm eating this. So I would prefer a longer term and maybe a more significant percentage. So like 5 years and a 20% increase, because I think the turnover rate in the city of Kingston has been so much that we're really excluding a lot of people. Does that make sense?
I don't think that it would include anyone that turned over, right? If someone had vacated a property during the look back period, they have no right to a fair market rent appeal, right? Yeah,
Right.
so that, I don't think that
apologize.
satisfies your
Okay,
concern.
I could be amenable to Carol's position.
That's 3 years, 14%. Mike,
No.
I'm on board with a 3-year, 14% look back.
I would be for like 4 years and 3 years or 4 years. Oh, 3. Okay. Yeah, I would be with that.
Yeah, I would support that as well.
What's on the table? Is that Carol's proposal or Michael's proposal, Junior's proposal?
Oh, yeah, I was saying Carol's proposal.
Yeah,
And I think I was also responding to Carol's proposal.
but that's not what.
Right, that's not, so we're not doing a formal motion. So we're not like committing to anything, but
Okay, so, and Michael Brown just said no to both of them.
Yep.
And you said yes to Carol.
and I would probably say yes to 3 or 16% also.
Or, I say yes to Junior's.
Okay.
I'd be open, but to a shorter look back period.
We're far apart.
A shorter look back period is what I said.
Sorry, I should say that for the record. I wish I could count. Yeah, I do it for a living. So thinking about a 3-year 14% look back, I think we've got Carol, Michael, me, Deanna, Mie, yeah,
I
not
mean,
Mike,
I'm open to that, but I want a 15% rent reduction. Are these separate items or are these?
Yeah, I mean, I think we shouldn't spend too much time here because ultimately the motion, right, we need to, I think we need to make a motion that combines both of these parts of the decision.
So thinking about this as like the look back period that we're getting towards agreement on, right? We're thinking about 3 years at 14 or 16%. Junior, does that change where you're at on a negative 15% annual adjustment?
I don't think there's any scenario where I could support a negative 15% annual adjustment.
I would support the junior's proposal for the look back period with a 15% reduction. I'm willing to make that motion if that's where we think that the majority is. I'm sorry, Arlene. I'm willing I could be willing to perhaps make a motion if that is where the majority lies for a 15% negative rental adjustment with a 3-year look back period set at 15%, right? 16%. If that's where, you know, that's kind of what my temp check is, the combined proposal.
Right. So thinking about a 3-year look back period with a 16% limit to increases in that past 3 years and a negative 15% annual adjustment, and we will refine the details about with heat and hot water or versus without heat and hot water in another conversation. Michael is on board with that. Carol, this isn't this isn't a motion. This is just like articulating your temperature check. Carol, is that
I'm solidly with Michael here.
Junior?
I'm down with a 3-year look back with the 16%. Right, I think I'm pretty sure those are the right numbers.
3 years, 16%, that's yours.
Yeah, okay. It's, you know, fine adjustments. Going forward, I feel that I would be amenable to a relatively flat adjustment for units that did not include utilities and a modest, roughly whatever we believe utilities increases might cost increase in order to maintain stabilization of rents while the fair market rent appeals shake out, which we know is probably going to take at least a year.
I feel like there may be two different things going on here.
Yeah, Junior has just articulated
One-
something different.
Well, one is over the 3 years, the rent should have, over the 3 years, the rent should have only been increased 5% each year, right? Now you seem to say reduction, which leads me to believe you think the rent should be reduced by 14% or
So
over those 3
we're
years.
So there are two separate conversations that we need to, that I was hoping we can merge into one. So we have the look back period where if your rent changed over X percentage, that's item one, and item two is the actual rental adjustment for 1 and 2 year leases. So I agree with Junior's proposal of the look back period of 3 years with a cumulative total change of plus 15%, 16%. But for the rental adjustment for 1 and 2 year leases, I want, I think that, and I think that's the majority of the board would support a negative 15% rental adjustment for 1 and 2 year leases.
So what we're doing a straw poll on is the proposal of a 15% reduction combined with a 3-year look back period at a 16% total increase. So that is what we're discussing. So we know that Junior is not on board. And her not on board. Arlene is, I am.
I am.
And Mike,
No.
I'm not there yet. I've seen DHCR making faces. I think, yes, please.
About an hour ago, you read what your board needs to look at to set the 1 and 2 year guideline.
Yes.
It's on. What this board needs to do is look at those enumerated issues to set a 1 year and a 2 year guideline. You need to do that, and you need to set a fair market rent appeal. For it to be defensible, you need to be able to justify the 1 and 2 year based on those pieces. And the fair market rent appeal is, I would suggest, would be a separate motion vote
Great.
across the board.
Thank you.
Well, so then. Yeah, can I make a motion?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'd like to move that we decide on a 15% reduction as our adjustment. And in the motion, for 1 and 2 year leases. In the motion, do I say the reasons, or like we've been discussing the reasons? I have to say them in the motion?
Yeah, I think we've said the reasons. You don't need to say them in the reason.
Okay. So wait, April's saying.
Second, I second.
Okay, so second.
Arlene seconds. Do we want further discussion, or do we want to call a motion? All right, hearing no discussion, I'm going to call the motion. Junior.
Nay.
No. Tara.
No.
Arlene.
Yes.
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 No.
Yes.
Yes.
The motion passes, or the motion carries with 6 votes. Turning to the other order of business is setting fair market rent appeal guidelines. I have heard from us that we think that the city's good cause eviction law sets a 5% requires that rent increases beyond 5% in a year need to be justified. That feels like that's been our anchor for what we think is a reasonable annual percentage change looking backwards. I think I would feel I would feel comfortable thinking about a 2-year look back at 10%. Is a place where I would start our conversation.
Excuse me, weren't we at 3 years, 16?
We were.
I'm
Do you want to
sorry, I'm
return?
sorry,
We
Chairman.
can return there.
I'm sorry, Chairman. Can you repeat your motion?
I would love to know if we could, so Arlene has correctly pointed out that we were having a conversation where it seemed like there was most of us on board with a 3-year 16% fair market rent appeal guideline. I think your implicit suggestion was we should just vote on that.
Yes, I make a motion that we look at a fair market rent guideline at 3 years and 16% increase.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Do we have discussion or do we just want to vote? Junior.
I feel that the discussion on the basis of this motion right now fundamentally makes the previous motion arbitrary. Yeah, that's my piece.
I feel very strongly that arbitrary is, the last motion that we made was rooted in our analysis of the rental market. It was rooted in the data that we've seen about the rental market here in Kingston. It was rooted in data provided for us by DHCR. It was rooted in data provided for us by Ulster County. It was rooted in an analysis of the way that renters are cost burdened by their rent, and it was rooted in an analysis of the separation between rental increases and core inflation. I think that to say that our conversation to say that the decision that we made was arbitrary is, I feel like it involves you not having listened to the last hour. I'm serious. That is, I take serious offense at that, and I think that that shows disrespect to the work that we as a board have done and the work that we as a board are doing, and the seriousness with which each of us here is taking our responsibility to consider the data available to us and to exercise reasonable judgment based in the data that we are required by law to look at. We looked at the data that the law requires us to look at, and we exercise judgment. And honestly, I'm disappointed to hear that from you, Junior. And I'm sorry to not bite my tongue, but
Chairman, thank you. I think that the 5% that we or the 5% per year, or 5.5, are we at 16? I think that is perfectly, I think we came to that number based off of a reasonable conclusion. I think, as much as I would like it to be a longer look back period, I think that using the 2019 Emergency Tenant Protection Act as our that we became eligible to opt in is a very reasonable starting point. So I do think 2019 is a very, suitable time period, with 5% as the good cause eviction in the city, as well as to, as we heard through the human data of public testimony, a lot of this did start in 2019 when Kingston had the failed vacancy study. So I do think we arrived here through perfectly reasonable consensus. So I will disagree with you on your own original proposal. But
Excuse me. I don't understand your discussion because the discussion on the table right now is 3 years, 16%. I'm sorry, I don't understand you bringing up 5%.
So per year, so 5% per year is 15. We made it 16. So that's, I apologize for any confusion.
It's late. Let's keep our numbers straight.
Yeah, so the 16% is from the 2019 Emergency Tenant Protection Act. I do find reasonable, and it is something I would vote for.
We have, sorry for my being out of order. We have a proposal, or we have a motion on the table that has been seconded. Is there other discussion of the motion? Yeah, Tara.
I just wanted clarification. Right now, we're agreeing to, well, discussing a 5% increase and a 3-year look back. So we're okay with increasing rents 5% for the last 3 years, but now we just decrease the next 2 years after that. Am I understanding that right? Okay.
Yes, I mean, it is a 3-year look back that saying that rents or capping the reasonable increase of rents at 16% over those 3 years, which is roughly a 5%, roughly equivalent to a 5% per year increase.
And then you're undoing that by doing a rent decrease for the next 2, possibly 2-year leases. Somewhat.
We have already passed that motion, yes.
Okay.
We have already passed the motion to do 1 and 2 year lease adjustments in the annual adjustment of -15%. Do we have other
And
discussion?
I
of the
actually,
motion on the
just
table?
a point of order clarifying question for our HCR attorneys. Is this August 1st, 2019 or January 1st, 2019? If we set a 3-year period.
That's up to one point you said.
Okay, I would prefer January 2019.
I'd like
start
to
the date.
amend my. What did I do?
Yeah.
Amend my motion to January 1st, 2019, look back period.
Second.
At 16%.
Now we're voting on the amendment, which is not voting on, unless it's a friendly amendment.
Just, we've got to vote on the amendment.
We're voting on the amended motion.
Yeah.
Are we voting? Right, so I think you made an amendment to your original motion. So the motion that we're voting on is your amended motion.
Okay, so the amended motion is January 1st, 2019, look back period, 16%.
Do we have other discussion? It's been moved, it's been seconded by Michael in its revised form. I'll call the question. Carol,
I vote yes.
Michael,
Yes.
Mike,
No.
yes.
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 Yes,
No.
No.
The motion carries. That is our,
oh, I have a.
Yeah.
You're going to close?
I
No.
was gonna ask if we had any other business.
Yes, you do.
One more piece of business.
I'd like to form a committee to look at guidelines for for public hearings. And the committee will present its report and recommendations to you at the next spring meeting.
I would like to ask our colleagues at DHCR if rent guidelines boards have in the past, or if we're forbidden from, or if we're allowed to form subcommittees to undertake specific items of business.
Well, this committee will we'll talk about it. We'll go through you and we'll see what's acceptable, what isn't acceptable. And then we'll just report to you. And we're not making any changes. We're just doing some investigation and some study, and then we'll bring this to you in the spring.
Would it be acceptable and allowable under public meetings rules for us? Michael, you're making a face.
I don't think, we would probably have to, notice those meetings and reserve City Hall and stuff like that. And is this a committee made up of the 9 of us, or are we just? Okay.
Not making any changes. We are studying the matter, and we're going to bring a report to the board on the next spring meeting.
Can I ask a question? What is the reason for this committee? Like, what would we be looking into?
I thought that I was traumatized by the last 5-hour meeting, and it was more than I was able to absorb. And I don't know what the answer is. Perhaps we have more meetings and shorter time periods, and also people speaking twice and not adding to the conversation. And I just wanted to look into that to see if things could be made a little more tolerable for me.
Is that something, that we can discuss as a board at a full board meeting?
We could discuss it as a full board meeting, but a person that's on the committee would be looking to see what is allowable under the sunshine laws and what isn't allowable, and we could bring suggestions, and we could do the research to see what is permitted, what isn't, and then the whole board wouldn't have to do it.
I think that we're all allowed to do research though, as individuals, or, and we're allowed to talk to each other, but we can't be in a group with more than half of us, right? Outside of these meetings. So I don't know if I think it's a good idea, but I don't know if we need to have a committee in order to do that. Like, I feel like, some of us can just do some research and we can talk about plans for the next time. And then we could have a whole group meeting, next spring, where we discuss what we want to do, how we want to organize the public hearings.
Okay, so I'll put the motion on the table and see if it floats. I move that we make a small committee to bring a report to the board for the spring meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
I'll call the question.
So I actually just want to discuss. So I do think that the impetus of your question is important, but we as the board are empowered to, at the start of the public hearing, and as long as it's noticed, say that there's an end time of, starts at 6, ends at 10, just as an example, I don't think we need, that's just policy versus.
Well, again, I could bring this policy and references to the board. And then and so then we could be working out of data and actual knowledge, rather than what you just said without reference right now. So I would have to, right now, I'm just taking your word for it, and I'm sure it's correct, but I would like to.
That's what we have attorneys for.
What?
That's what we have the attorney sitting behind us for, to tell us what is and isn't allowed.
I was just trying to save money.
So,
I was
totally
trying to save
understand.
time for the board, that's all.
I totally understand. But I think we can just do it without making more work for you.
I agree with Michael. We want to start a committee, fine, but I think an email or two to DHCR people to clarify any thoughts you have and would probably be sufficient.
I am also inclined to finding an informal solution. And I would love to talk with you. I'm also inclined to find an informal solution, and I would love to work with you to identify what suggestions you and I should bring to the board at our spring meeting. But we have a motion on the table. Do we have other discussion, or do we want to call the question? I'm going to call a question. Carol. Yeah, Mia seconded. Carol.
Yes, if you want to form a committee, yes, but I'm in favor of emails.
No.
No.
I vote no to forming a committee.
No.
No.
Yes.
No.
The motion fails. And Arlene, I think you and I have our work cut out for us. Any other business? Otherwise, I will take an entertain a motion to adjourn.
Have we completed 100% of our statutory requirements?
That's an excellent question. Have we completed our statutory requirements?
As set forth in the public notice, there is a requirement for a certification meeting that can be set now or at a later date.
I would just as soon set that now. At what time frame should we plan a certification meeting?
Well, something is going to need to be written up. It's typically written by DHCR staff. It's an explanatory statement, and that can't be turned around over the holiday weekend, certainly. So, the certification meeting is typically held in September after June meetings. So that gives you a indication of what kind of time frame those are usually turned around in. You have passed the guidelines that you set forth to pass. And so the certification is kind of a ceremonial thing. It doesn't have to be done as soon as possible. So I would set it out significantly further than this upcoming Monday. I mean, you could
January?
even look at January, yes.
I'm hearing January. How about the week of January 9th?
By Zoom. I intend to be out of the country in January.
Do we need everyone present or just a quorum?
You're going to be voting to certify the explanatory statement and to certify the vote or the votes that you made here tonight. So a quorum will need to be present in order to have the necessary votes in order to pass both of those. So some people can be absent, but can't be so many that you won't have the votes necessary to do what you need to do at certification.
Does January sound good? When are you returning, Carol?
I'm not sure when I'm returning. I'm returning to attend any board meetings in May.
Is May too far away? Yes.
When are you
May is too
leaving?
far away.
I'm leaving at the end of the month.
The end of this month?
So if this is mostly ceremonial, why does it take so long? Why do we need this 3-month period? Why can't it be in the second week of December? you know, does it take that significant time period for you? I mean, I don't want to force you guys to rush or anything.
The explanatory statement has not begun to be drafted because you guys needed to make your determinations tonight for the board to draft it up. I honestly don't know how long it's going to take. So January seems like an appropriate time to put this. If you're missing one board member, you can still hold a meeting, but it's really up to this board to find an appropriate date. And again, you can table the finding of the date till, you know, a later time. I don't know. It may be worthwhile to see what the availability is of the rest of the board.
So we just need, we're certifying our decision. Okay, so we need at least 5 votes to do that. Without Carol, we'll have still at least 5 votes, right? As long as everyone else is here and people continue to believe, stand by their votes tonight.
Great. Do you want to pick a date in December that works? Sorry, January. Thank you. The week of the 9th, the week of the 23rd.
Of my calendar through them. I don't even know if City Hall has their calendar through January ready.
Great. I will entertain a motion to table this decision about picking a date for our certification meeting.
But then we have to come here on Monday.
Do we have to come here? Would we have to come to a meeting to pick a date? So we would have to, no. Okay.
It can be chosen by the group. We will put out a public notice as to whatever.
Great.
We'll still send it.
But we don't need to like have a public meeting to pick the date. Great. Okay.
I have a question. The date, we're done with that, right? We're not gonna do that right now.
Well, I think we have not yet passed a motion to table picking a date.
Okay, I second your motion to table the date.
Great. Carol. Michael.
Aye.
Mike.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes,
Yes.
it passes. We'll table picking a date.
I have a question. We talked about apartments with utility, with gas and electric, and apartments without gas and electric. Is that something we have to think about?
We did not set different annual adjustments this year for different classes of apartment. At next year's meetings, we will set an adjustment, and we can set an adjustment that is different for units with and without tenant plate utilities. I would love to entertain a motion to adjourn. Do you want to make the motion?
I'll make the motion.
Deanna makes a motion to adjourn. Mia seconds.
Aye.
All in favor? Aye. All opposed? We're adjourned. It's 9:52. Thank you so much. I'm gonna go to bed.